So my proposition here is that improving face-to-face and going virtual is actually better in some situations than working face-to-face. So I know that's fairly controversial, and people's expectations and experience of what the face-to-face world offers compared to the virtual world. But I'm going to show you a real case study of some work I did 2 weeks ago, where the overwhelming participant reaction was that this was better than their experience of traveling into a center of a city, sitting for a day with a government team to talk about policy, and coming away thinking, I didn't really get much input. I didn't get a chance to say what I really thought about it. And now the process is gone, and the policy team have gone back to their own work and so on. So I've been working with collaboration technologies and group decision-making collaboration technologies for over 25 years. And my focus is as a practitioner, as a facilitator in designing and running high quality meetings, whether they're face-to-face or virtual. And I use technology diligently in order to service the participants' requirements and the hosts' requirements, the presenters' requirements, in order to get the best quality view from that. So there's my background. You'll find me on LinkedIn, and I'm also delighted to be working with NetworkTables on this series of events that look at what people are doing to adapt and manage in this this lockdown situation. So objectives for today, I'm going to talk about this 80-person UK government stakeholder engagement workshop and look at the way they worked and the benefits and the opportunities. We're going to have a practice working remotely with technology. So you're going to get hands-on to MeetingSphere to have that experience. When we get to it, I'm going to look just very briefly at the huge technology market and make some suggestions about how you might look at and review what is currently out there in the tech market, because it's been growing exponentially for the last 10, 15 years. And there are now lots of tools that claim to do the same thing. But actually, as a practitioner and an expert in this field, I've made some distinctions between the sorts of things that they are claiming to do and how that landscape works. Okay. Also want to leave you in reflection about how you might create different types of events, and certainly virtual events, in combination with your events that you go back to running when we get out of this lockdown. Any questions so far? Concerns? Okay. So just very briefly, the setup here. A government team, they design policy, they write policy, they equate to the political agenda, but they're also looking at the wider context in terms of how that impacts with stakeholders. So this is the smart energy team of the Business Enterprise and Industrial Strategy Department in the UK. And the pressure they were under was, we've made a commitment to carbon neutrality by 2050. And the UK also take on the presidency of the COP26 conference, which until shortly after this workshop was still planning to be run in October this year in Glasgow. It's since been cancelled or postponed, but nevertheless, the team have the urgency to keep on track with their policy development. So they wanted the stakeholders to have the chance to really look into the emerging policy and give feedback on some very specific aspects of the policy and the emerging thinking, and influence that, because they, of course, are the ones that need to implement and change behaviors around this. The technology had been around. I've been working with this particular department for over 18 years, and one of the services they offer in their internal consultancy and change group is the use of MeetingSphere to manage stakeholder engagement, internal workshops. We look at bullying and harassment, and some quite difficult topics where teams are going through transition. So getting people to interact and participate is the key focus, which lifts this from a ordinary workshop in a face-to-face environment where you've got flip charts and post-it notes and whiteboards and so on, into this more collaborative, engaging process. This was a 2.5-hour workshop, which effectively replaced the whole day of workshop that was planning. There's a question about security. I will briefly mention security, but you know, we do run it with, you know, customers are using it in banks and contractors and government and so on. So there are ways through the process of getting that whitelisted and implemented it in organizations with very strict security details. So I work for Realise Europe Limited, and one of the tools we use is MeetingSphere, and I help design and coach and train people to use this way of working. The two technologies I'm using today are MS Teams, because that's what NetworkTables have provided for us today, and MeetingSphere, okay? And what I'm hoping for is there's a very easy and intuitive interface that I'll show you in a moment that gives you access to the process and the ability to participate. So before I come back to the outcomes from that, what I'd like you to do is just consider the following question, and we'll have a little process of you know, what it feels like to participate in this activity. So I'm switching into a Brainstorm now. This is one of the tools that allows us to help capture thinking. And I've made it complicated because I've asked you two questions. And I'd like you to reflect on what your experience of remote working is, and also what your customers or clients' learning is around what their current situation is. So you can see the two questions in folders on the left-hand side. The top one says, what are you learning? And the second one says, what are your clients learning? And you can navigate between the two just by clicking. I'm now showing you on the Zoom shared screen as well. And you simply type in your idea at the bottom. So let me just give you a couple of minutes just to add in some thoughts and questions on those two questions. And if anybody can't get to MeetingSphere, then simply type it into the Zoom chat and I'll copy and paste it into the tool. And of course, there is a bit of content in there already. And what I can also encourage you to do is on the far right-hand side of the content that's already there is a little comment icon where you can add a reflection or a supportive comment or an opposite view, just to give that flavor, so you can comment on other people's content. Okay, is everybody happy with that? See some content going in? Okay. So I hope you've had a chance just to see that and capture that. So you can see that these aren't bullet points. These are, you know, proper statements, thoughtful statements from people. You can also see that in the comment section, by clicking on that little icon to the right-hand side, I've actually added a layer here where I'm encouraging people to respond to a couple of prompts. So of course we set this up in advance. So what I'm trying to do is get people to be even more thoughtful about the comments. And the prompt here is, how are you ensuring that this is continued in the new norm following lockdown? and what can you do to ensure that your own practice includes this learning? So I'm always trying to encourage people to think deeper. And the significant difference between what happens in the room when you ask these questions as facilitator and using these tools online, or indeed in the room, is that everybody can contribute simultaneously. So the conversation is not dominated by those few people who always have an answer, who always speak first. And you get much more depth and perspective from those people who perhaps find it less easy to speak in a large group. And I call those people reflectors, and they're the ones that I really want to connect with and give the ability to contribute, because they're often the ones with really good, thoughtful ideas that they may be a little anxious about speaking openly about, because they're perhaps not core central ideas that everybody else has, but they're a little bit off to the side. And therefore you get that breadth and depth of different perspectives and contributions. Okay, and I can see some of you added some comments. Okay, so any reflections on that? Do you want to come off mute and say anything about that? Any thoughts?
I don't get how I can reflect on, maybe I'm doing something wrong, but if I would like to reflect on what are you learning. Number 5, let's say number 5. So I click on the comments on the idea. I see 2 comments, and then how can I?
Yeah, so I've put 2 prompts in. Just select one of the prompts, and it opens a box that invites you to
right.
response.
Yeah, there I am. Yep.
I mean, of course, we can use it without the prompts as well. It's just to show that kind of dynamic of how you converge people to a way of thinking. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the additional things we can do now is just, it's often because we're getting a much richer, wider, larger number of comments from people. Quite often you need to give them an opportunity to say, okay, so what's really important here? What are the kind of key learnings? And we have a short, quick and easy voting opportunity. And what I've done is I've switched on 3 green sticky dots, which are at the top left. And you simply click, hold and drag those 3 sticky dots onto the ideas, the learnings that you think are most significant. So of course it doesn't have to be your own, it could be anybody's, but the ones that kind of, you know, hold out for you or make sense to you. Okay, and if you want to move them, you simply click and move them again, so you can, as you read through, you can make sure you've got the right top 3. Excellent. Is everybody doing this, or are you seeing this on my screen? I don't know how many people have actually got in. Baz, I know you're watching on the screen share. So if you want to come off mute and say, I want it to go on to number 9 or 2 or whatever, then I can vote for you. Okay. Very good. I can see some additional comments going in as well. Okay. So giving you the opportunity, of course, to verbalize your question, but as well as contributing through the technology, this gives everybody equal opportunity to contribute fully. All right. And I can stop that allocation, and I can very quickly show us the rank order of ideas, so that we've now got the one that got 4 sticky dots, that this way of working using remote tools is now a must-have rather than a nice-to-have, has been selected as the top one. So just nothing particularly scientific about this rating. And MeetingSphere has a proper converging rating activity where you can vote statements against multiple criteria. But in this case, and in the case study, we just wanted people to, we asked them basically, what were the key messages that you wanted to land with the policy team and ensure that they heard? So what are the most important? And we just gave them the idea to highlight those with the sticky dots. Okay. Fantastic. So you can see that prioritization there, that quick prioritization. Any questions or comments at this stage? No? Okay. So I'll flick you back into the presentation and navigate you away from that. And this slide is basically just looking at the results and what happened in that 2.5-hour workshop that again replaced a 1-day workshop with 80 people. So if you have that in your mind, I'm sure everybody's experienced that type of meeting where you're doing a sequence of presentations, you're having a Q&A, you're perhaps doing some table work with people, you're perhaps putting them in specialist groups so they can look at one particular aspect of this emerging policy, and you're collecting ideas perhaps on flip charts, perhaps in note form, perhaps in one of the more basic tools like Slido or Mentimeter where you can capture questions, but this is giving us the opportunity to really collaborate and collect a good deal of data around some very specific things. So we collected over 550 verbatim comments. Very, very few of them are sort of 2 or 3 words. Most of them were specific sentences giving a very detailed perspective as feedback on this emerging policy. We also find that this way of working stimulates discussion. So it's not about it being silent and people typing through, and managing 80 people on a call is of course another step up in terms of managing and facilitating. But as I'm trying to show you here, I'm seeking to ask questions and give people an ample opportunity to contribute verbally as they see fit. So I'm giving time for people to think, ask questions, and the various methodologies, either through the Zoom chat or indeed in the tools, to put their point of view across or indeed ask a question. That fourth point there, the third point, so stakeholders focus on their key policy areas. So they're asking specific and open questions about how close to the mark they are with the policy decisions they're making, to really give those stakeholders an opportunity to influence and guide them to get the best possible policy delivered. We saw sticky point voting. So that's just, as I said earlier, how we asked the participants to highlight the key elements that they were contributing back to the policy team, so they could look at those in that context. And we also felt that one of the aspects and possibilities with this tool is that we can move into an overtime or asynchronous mode, as well as this synchronous mode that we're experimenting with today. So by leaving the technology open, anybody can click that URL at any time. They can go in and they can continue to contribute. So in some cases, we had specialists who were representing organizations go back and speak to their teams and speak to their senior managers and actually really hone down their response and their feedback to the policy. And then that could be captured later on. So we left it open for a week. Yeah, and that's a great question coming in. So yes, normally there would be a production team, as you would in a normal event, and there'd be one person at least who would be monitoring the chat and the questions coming in. There'd be content experts, people managing the content from the policy team perspective, so they could ask supplementary questions when there was any ambiguity or something they didn't understand. And then there's me, and I'm managing the process, I'm facilitating it, keeping it on time and so on. So yeah, great question. Hopefully the interface and the way that you're drawn into the different activities as participants is simple, and it means you can't be distracted by other things or trying to get your head around the technology. And Ingrid, great example. I'm not sure where I'm typing. I could then just explain quickly, and you got into it. So it's about speaking up and saying that you're struggling with something, either through the chat or indeed through the technology itself. And we also have, because we're remote working, a WhatsApp chat group between the presenters, the policy team, the experts, and the facilitation team, so that we have that back channel so that we can keep everything on track and communicate and set people up for the next step in the presentation and so on. Okay. So one of the huge outcomes is that nobody in the policy team has to be focused on writing up notes or collecting those thoughts or furiously writing and capturing, because you're encouraging people, even though they're speaking as well, to capture their thoughts into the technology so that it's not lost. And that massively improves the accuracy and the quality of the input, and therefore the data that the team are going to work on after that. And the reason why I chose to do this case study with NetworkTables was because specifically, and I'll show you this in a minute, 1 in 3, a third of the feedback comments mentioned that they felt this experience was better than a recent workshop that had been held in London with 80 participants, and that they'd actually found that they were interacting more and able to get more from that session, so more value from the session. Okay, so let me just pause. Any questions? Okay, so let me show you an example of what they were actually doing. So this activity is meetings for activity called discussion. And basically, although the default is anonymous, what you've got on your screens now is a team, so that we ask people to say what their perspective was. So where in this group of stakeholders they were. So if you get that flag, you could just click other or consumer or whatever. This is now dummy data, so it doesn't matter. This is not going to affect the outcome of the UK energy policy. So please just select one of those. And then during the 2.5 hours, in sort of 20-minute slots, 25-minute slots, there was a short presentation on these 5 elements, actually 4, because we came back to what was missing from our vision for the policy at the end, just as a coverall. But those 4 key elements, and there were sub points or prompts in those. So if you just click enter in any one of those, let's go for the green one. So I can focus you all into that, so I can facilitate you to be looking at the same thing I'm looking at. And what you will see right at the bottom is there are 2 pages of this. So let's just take you back to the top. Okay, and what we're looking at here is one of the prompts in this ESO DNO flexibility markets is, what do you think the actions need to be taken by industry are? And under there, you can see that with their tags, you've got very specific comments and detailed comments from each of those stakeholders. Not everybody comments on everything because they're not all interested in everything, but within this context, they can go into what areas that they feel they represent and therefore need to contribute through. So as you scroll down this, you can see that the second question is, what actions do you think need to be taken by Ofgem, which is the energy omnibus? And you can see that there are discussions going on. So you can see down at number 181, an aggregator said something, a supplier has agreed, another aggregator has completely agreed, and the trade associations have agreed. So then the supplier has said something else, agree, it makes no sense to be technology, therefore carbon agnostic, etc., etc. So you can see that there's a detailed conversation that these stakeholders may have had at a table group previously, but it's kind of lost in the wind and not captured in a conventional workshop. So here you're getting that dialogue, and after the workshop, the policy team can reflect on that and make sure that they're influencing their policy in the right area. Does that make sense? Okay, and you can see at the end of each of these 25-minute slots where we rotated through the 4 topics, that we had the ability to then sticky dot what you think are the most important messages that you wanted the policy team to hear. Okay. Any questions or reflections on that? Nothing in chat on Zoom. Okay. So that's what it looks like. Following the workshop, the team then get the ability to just change the way the data is sorted. And here, again, you need to, there's no other here, but you can just click one of the team tags. And the content has now been converted into a tool that's much more designed for the team, so the policy team, to then make sense of this data. So I can add a new folder here, key points to include in the policy going forward. And I've added that at the bottom, and then actually have a little play. So you can just pick up any of the content and you can click and drag it into that new folder. Okay, so you can see the key points going in. So the team can then take their time and reflect and think through what are the opportunities there. Okay, and we can add another folder which is perspectives that we can't accommodate in this policy. Okay, so the stuff that's out of scope. So I'm inviting them, and I'm working with them after the workshop to make sense of this data so they get the information in the right order that they need it. Okay, and then just finally, just to show you the flexibility, when it comes to a team making a critical decision, it's really important to have people able to score in a rating way so that you can see the degree of consensus or not around these things. So here's some different data that has come from another group where we've crafted statements that are all of equal level. And I'm inviting you to effectively rate these on a 1 to 5 scale. So if you just want to make a pretty pattern down that right-hand side, you don't need to read them. And I'll give you just a minute to have a little go at what the rating tool looks like, and then I can show you the results, because critically as a facilitator, it's hugely beneficial to me for me to be able to see where there is consensus in the group, and of course where there isn't consensus, which will then trigger another conversation about why there are 2 different views or multiple views around a particular issue. So the focus and the ability to have people sort of, have a visible sense of where their level of agreement is, gives them that psychological transition where this becomes their data. So they own this outcome because they've created it, they've been guided through the process, and now they're making decisions, and their buy-in or level of confidence in those decisions is way above what you can achieve in a room where you've got a show of hands or people voting on paper or using polling tools that are quick. So this is a considered, reflected voting opportunity. Okay, and I will just shut you off from those, and I will show you the results. So the results are now coming to your screen. And here, all those statements are now ranked by the mean score. And 4.14 is a pretty good mean score and pretty good consensus on that 5-point scale. It's also showing the standard deviation. And if you click on the blue semicircle on the top right of the screen next to the mean and standard deviation, you will open up the ability to see the range of views, so where people actually voted on that 5-point scale. And we can add comments and so on as well, so we can have ratings scored by comment as well as the number. So again, I'm looking at the degree of consensus, and if you look down to number 10, you'll see that there's a red 0.31, which means that that standard deviation is above the coefficient of agreement, which is 0.3 on this standard deviation scale of 0 to 1. So I can immediately see, because Meeting Sphere is highlighting it to me, where there is less agreement. And therefore I can draw attention to that and discuss that and draw out perhaps some more thinking about why people disagree on that particular issue. Okay. Any questions or comments? So I'm going to draw you back into the presentation. So just again, that's hopefully what we've shown in this short demonstration, on this interactive demonstration. And you can see that, you know, everything that's been produced can be worked on over time afterwards, and then the team continue to work on it. And then when they need a Word or Excel version, it's a very simple process just to create that in one click from MeetingSphere, and it comes out as a formatted Word document. So the team's reflection right at the bottom there, the software provided the download of all the inputs, which we will digest later, and no one needs to take any notes. We couldn't have done these things at all or as effectively using MS Teams alone. So that was their kind of instant reaction to it. The feedback from the participants, and we simply asked them what went well, what would you do differently, and any other questions and feedback. And you can see, it's a busy slide, I know, but I've highlighted in bold those comments that related to the fact that this experience as a stakeholder contributing to an emerging policy by government was a better experience than they had had in previous face-to-face workshops. Okay. Any reflections, comments? You all still out there? Okay. So just to sort of bring us to a close now, we've got 10 minutes left. My proposition around us as facilitators owning this category of technology, I think needs to have some very simple guides or rules around this. And what I see in my work is effectively 6 categories of collaboration tool. And often they all purport to be doing the same thing. So what I've done here is I've just listed the 6, and they are corporate social networks, video and conferencing tools, which you're all familiar with, event management and conferencing tools, so the Eventi, the other tools that you use perhaps on handheld or smartphones in the meeting to track participants, allow them to see the workshop streams, allow them to connect with other people, ask questions and polls and so on. So those might be the technologies that you're most familiar with in the room in a large conference. There's team and project management tools, and these are effectively trying to replace email in organizations where project teams can work in a particular stream or channel. They work with chat, they work with shared whiteboards and so on. And then there are visual collaboration tools, so shared whiteboards where you can connect 2 rooms across the world and you can have the same thing shown on each. And quite often the manufacturers of these technologies add tools like post-it notes. So they make a graphic representation of a post-it note, and you can move them around the board and so on, and get some way to making sort of convergent decisions based on that, but not in the sophisticated way that this last group come up, which is decision support and meeting workshop tools. I'm going to come back to the what are the pitfalls question. That's a great question. And I just want to show you this rather confusing map, which is some of the technologies that exist in those categories. And you can see the corporate social networking, you can see the visual collaboration tools at the top, you can see the video and audio in the bottom left, you can see the event management and audience participation tools in the bottom, and the team and project platform tools in the middle. And then towards the right and the top, decision support, meeting, workshop tools. And there's MeetingSphere and 1 or 2 other examples with some of the competitors some of whom have been around for 20 odd years. Some of them are very new to the market, all trying to do the same thing, give facilitators the tools to support a group in really high quality participation and interaction to the point where we can converge on a good set of outcomes. So I don't know whether you've come across many of those technologies, but I think just notice where they are on the map, and the two axes are the low functionality to high flexible functionality at the bottom, and then for specific use, i.e. conference calls or face-to-face events at the lower end, and then generic use, so that, you know, in the hands of a skilled facilitator, they can be very flexible and support a huge range of different types of meetings. Okay, so one just final thought that I've got with you on the tools is that in all my kind of hundreds of workshops I've done over the last few years, both face-to-face and virtually with the technology, there's a core DNA, or there's a process that you go through in the design. And this is a very generic design, but it stood me well for that initial conversation with sponsors and owners of events in terms of what they're trying to achieve. And there are 5 steps, and these I'm talking about divergent and convergent steps. So in the that we're talking about today, we've done a lot of step 1, create, and a little bit of theming and sorting and discussing. So this is not for every group to go through every single way, every single step, but it might be split into 2 or 3 meetings. It might be different groups that go through these different stages. But if you take an idea about, let's say, a project learning meeting, everybody gets the opportunity at the beginning to say what their experience on that project was. You can then group those ideas into the areas of the project or the significant next steps or whatever. You then go into a deep dive in step 3 and more of a divergent discussion around let's make sense of this data and all these different perspectives. Then you filter that through a decision process. So you select the criteria that you need, and you decide which have an impact that you can then learn from, because you're able to apply it back into your business or in subsequent projects. And then of those that qualify, you then build an action plan. And I think that's a very nice generic kind of yardstick, if you like, or a process by which you can look at the various tools that are out there, or that perhaps your clients are suggesting you use, and say, well, what do we need in terms of how far we need to get with this group, and what sort of the end point is, what the objective of this process is, and what therefore is the technology that can support this. And I think that's the way to tackle this, rather than the rather sort of hit and miss process that we are dealing with these emerging technologies, which is we're trying lots of different things. We're never therefore becoming an expert in any of these tools, and therefore we're not learning how best to get the most value out of the tools. And that's the core proposition that I'm offering to my clients, which is, you know, trust me as an expert to show you what's possible, given that you're trying to achieve this. So I'll just pick up on those questions then. So the first content then tool, is that what you mean? So I think, yes, content is king, and the way you process and the way you select the tool that will help you get the best from those participants is the main decision criteria. So always go for the plan and design of the event first, then go to, well, what technology do I need? And perhaps look at the range of technologies and some of the different options, and play with them, download them. They've all got free trials for 14 days or 30 days, particularly now. And experiment, ask questions, you know, challenge the developers, the organizations who are building these tools, and see what else you can get from it, and what other features and functionality that they've built into the tools that you might not be able to see at first glance. and I'm struggling to find what the pitfalls are. I guess the pitfalls are we're transitioning quite a long way. When I first did this 25 years ago, a bunch of senior C-level people walked into a meeting room, and some of you will be too young to remember this, but we used to have assistants and secretaries who used to do the typing in those bad old sexist days. And some of these senior people would bring in their secretary because they'd heard there was typing to do during the meeting. I very quickly got rid of those assistants because they have a much bigger job to do outside of the room and taking notes or typing for their bosses. But we've seen a massive transition. Everybody now communicates with text, with email, with chat, with Huddle, with whatever your corporate social network is. We're very used to communicating with our family and friends on text, particularly during these times. So I think people are much more able now to collect their thoughts and write what they really mean in text. So the pitfalls are, of course, the technology, the security. There may be a situation where you have to look at the security requirements of the organization, and one of the criteria when you're selecting the technology you're using is, is this built to the right level of security? Is it encrypted? Is it manageable? Where's the data held, particularly if it's a cloud-based and so on? So I think those are the things that, really, once you've proved that this is adding value to the organization, it's then worth taking on those steps and those battles to have the rest of the organization, the IT department and so on, to accept it. So I don't know whether anybody else can see any other pitfalls, or their experience has been that technology hasn't worked or hasn't been used effectively or whatever. But with good design and diligent support and expert help, it's possible to get huge value from this.
Well, could it also be like resistant from the participants? So they're being skeptical and
yeah, I find exactly the opposite. I think there's always one or two cynics, particularly in government policy groups, where a stakeholder's got a particular angle, or they're part of a lobby group, or they're part of an action group. But actually their voice gets equal airtime to everybody else's. Whereas in the conventional sense, they're always the one going to be standing up and making the same point over and over again. Mm-hmm. So, there are some cynics who feel that this doesn't give them the voice because they have set that expectation that as long as they can say the same thing over and over again and interrupt throughout the day, they're getting their point across. But actually everybody else in the room is thinking, will this guy please shut up? We've heard what he said and we've got much more important things to say. Okay. So the reflectors and the, what we used to call introverts, people who are less willing to kind of put their hands up in front of 80 people and speak and be confident that they can say it in an eloquent way that, is, the way they wanted to say it, they are much more enabled by this process, which perhaps sometimes is 80% of the people. How many people in a group of 80 will go through the whole day and not actually speak out in the whole group?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true. Yeah. Thank you.
Could it be worthwhile to have a pre-virtual event voting on topics or subjects? I do that for my face-to-face events, so I can imagine it would be very helpful in determining the tools, etc. Absolutely brilliant point. I can't stress enough how over time, the pre-work and the post-work after a collaborative face-to-face event has significantly enhanced the process. So if you ask your participants what their main concerns or topics are that they want to discuss during the event, then you get a whole load of data in advance. So you can really help prepare your presenters, your content providers, and your session owners to really focus on those things that people know are more important because they've given you that advance warning. So yeah, I always build in a ramp up, an event, and a ramp down, whether it's online or face-to-face.
Can you give, I know we're over time, I'm sorry, but it was my question. Thank you for answering that one. But can you think of a way to do that? You use MeetingSphere, for instance, for the virtual event, the actual virtual event. Are you using the same tool in order to retrieve that information, pre-information or post-information for that matter?
Yeah, exactly, Thelma. We're just sending out a link and we're inviting people to click the link and go in and, you know, multiple times if they want, and they can join a discussion. So we set it up as an online discussion before the event so they can get their thinking together, consult with their teams perhaps, and they can really focus on what would bring value to them from the event. And you as organizers get that huge insight into what is most important. And you can run it for a week, for 2 weeks or whatever. And you can build that in as part of your preparation for the event. You know, 2 or 3, you know, publications saying, guys, there's a great debate going on online. Don't miss out. Help influence how we focus on the core topics and the most important issues in our event. Don't miss out. So, you know, it's kind of, you know, it's be there or don't have your voice heard in that process. And people find the value in the face-to-face event is much more powerful because the most important topics are being discussed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Listen, we are over time. I'm really, you know, grateful for you hanging in there. I'm happy to hang on for a few minutes. I don't have anything else for the next 45 minutes. If anybody wants to continue with the questions. It has been voted, so it has been recorded. So Corinne will circulate that. And just one final question. How much time were participants given to answer all those questions in the voting rating? So they're given adequate time and the tool will tell me how many people have voted and completed and their progress bar. So I know when everybody has voted. And, you know, I do encourage people who are slower than the average to speed up, just by joking with them and saying, you know, those of you who are taking more time on this, we're ready to show the results. And if there's 1 or 2 people who perhaps get stuck and then get distracted by something else because you're remote and it might be anything, then we can just close them off and show the results. And those people can add their other votes later. So yeah, it's about using your facilitative knowledge and expertise in combination with the technology. So you're not learning anything new about facilitating, you're just adapting it slightly to this new world where you have the technology and support, which is adding huge value. Thank you, everyone. I've really enjoyed talking with you, and thank you for your questions. You'll find me on LinkedIn. You'll find me on, well, through the NetworkTables posting for this event, and you can email me at realizegroup.com.